Getting comfy up here. I love it. So this morning, I am excited to be back to talking again about the idea of biblical meditation as we are jumping back into our series. And last week, we opened up the series, and I'm going to give a short little recap. But I want to remind everybody of the idea of this, that looking forward towards this next year, we're trying to really answer the question of how do I approach the scriptures meaningfully? And my personal answer, as I've been trying to answer that question myself this past year, has been meditation. And I explained a bit about what that means last week, and today we're going to jump into what I have titled Letting the Scriptures Speak. And so, as a reminder, biblical meditation, in simple terms, is filling my mind, as opposed to what we commonly think of meditation today as clearing my mind. We found that the word used in the Bible for biblical meditation has the idea of filling my mind, of thinking on something, of really trying to search and to parse out the ideas of it, so much so that it is all that my mind can focus on. It's all that my mind is surrounded, or like the thought is surrounded. And the theme verse is Philippians 4:8, which has this similar idea presented of, finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. And so last week, we came away with this idea that for me to really find value in the scriptures, a lot of the times it is going to come from me not just thinking about them in a general sense, not just reading them, but really sitting down and meditating on what they have to say. Now, this week, what I want to talk about is a bit more about the actual method of how we approach. And I'm talking mostly about our own biases, the way that when I approach the scriptures, I can shape them before I ever really read them. And that's why I've titled it Letting the Scriptures Speak, is we want to learn how to let the scriptures say what they actually have to say. I'm really trying here. It is on, yeah. Aha. So here's my big question for today that I want us to ask. And it's going to sound a little odd. Obviously, you can read it, so it's not a surprise. It's going to sound a little odd because we're in church, we're doing a whole sermon, we do a lot with the Bible, so it feels like this really commonplace thing that we shouldn't have to ask what the purpose of the Bible is. But that's what I want to talk about today. What is the purpose of the Bible? Because the answer that you have to this question is going to shape how you approach it. And I have two examples of that. I want us to see that depending on what it is, I will change the way that I read it based on how I view it. So my first example is a menu. A menu is written, designed in such a way that I can quickly go through it and I can ignore as much information as possible. There's a bunch of headings and a bunch of categories that help me to quickly sift through and find the page that I want to find, whether I want entrees or a full course meal, whether I want appetizers, drinks, different things like that. And so it's built so that I can ignore all the things that I don't want and quickly get to the thing that I want, just read the little section that I want so that I can order quickly. That's the whole point of the menu design, is so that I can order quickly because they don't want us to take too long. That's the truth of it. And so when I read a menu, I'm not sitting there trying to meditate on the menu. I mean, I'm just not. Now, sometimes I do have hard choices of whether or not I want this thing or this thing, and you might call that meditation. But really, I'm not reading a restaurant menu so that I can like gather all of the information and really soak in what the menu has to speak to me. If you are, I think you love food just a little too much. Now, on the other hand, there is something I was trying to do the best that I could. Genuinely, I was trying, and I was going through lists in my head of different things that we read, and like what is something that people really focus on and they read through, and it's like disclaimers, no, people just skip past that. Like caution signs, no, people just ignore that. So it feels like people ignore a lot of what they're supposed to read, really. But I came up with a loan contract. I really, really hope that if you are signing a loan, you are reading it with like some serious intentionality, please read it. It's very important. But when you approach a loan contract, you're not simply skipping through sections to try and find the one piece of like item on the menu that you want to find. You're trying to read through it to understand, especially the numerics, what the numbers are that you were agreeing to. And if you are really getting deep into it, you may be trying to ascertain the spirit of the contract that you are reading. So beyond just the literal words themselves, what is the overall intent of the contract? And so you can just see in these two ideas here that we read both menus and contracts, but the way that we do it is completely different. My mentality when I approach them is completely different, and the methodology of how I actually read and what I do with the information that I get, completely different. And the same is true with the Bible. That when I read the Bible, the way that I think about it changes the way that I read it. And so I want to ask you again this kind of same question of what is the purpose of the Bible, and specifically for you, why do you pick it up to read in the first place? Is it because that's something that you've been told you're supposed to do? Is it because you're looking for some comforting words in a hard time? Maybe it's because you're looking for an answer to a moral issue. And there's more that I could list here, and none of these are wrong. Let's put that out there. None of these are wrong in of themselves. You know, like you can read and do all of these things individually, and that's okay. But I want us to accept one simple truth. If you fall into any of these categories, or a lot of other categories that we might have to read, and that is that those are not going to give you the full depth and wealth of truth that the Bible has for you. The Bible has more to offer than just comforting words in a hard time. The Bible has more to offer than just answers to moral questions. And the Bible has more to offer than just something that I read because I'm supposed to in my religious structure. It's more than all of those things, more than all of them combined even. And I want us to kind of look and see, this is not meant to be an insult. This is meant to be truth that I have observed as I've talked to a bunch of different people about reading the Bible. This is the common experience that I hear. Pick it up, read, don't find anything that speaks to me, move on. That is the experience that I see most often with people trying to approach the Scriptures. And again, they may be approaching it for all sorts of different reasons, but they kind of come with this same ending, which is that it didn't speak to them in the way that they were expecting it to do so. And it leads to these and maybe other things, but I thought that these were 4 really common outcomes. Self-doubt in your own ability to read, to gather information, or like your own spiritual depth, that you're just not spiritual enough to get what's there. I see that a lot in people when they don't get what they expect the Bible to give them. Apprehension about reading, not knowing where to start, where to look in the Bible, because, well, I read before trying to answer a question and I didn't find anything, so I don't know how to answer this question, or I don't know where to start reading, and if I start reading here, am I going to be missing something? So a lot of like apprehension and a lot of worry that prevents them from starting to read at all. Frustration, which is just that this general belief that I have that the Bible is good, filled with truth, and supposed to be helpful, but it's not. I read it, I'm trying to do my best. I mean, it's so boring, and I took time out of my day to read it, and then I didn't get anything out of it. And I'm just frustrated because it doesn't seem like the Bible's doing its job. I'm doing mine. And then finally, I think a lot of people just get bored. I think a lot of people read it out of obligation, but they don't really get anything that excites them. They don't really see any changes to their life. And so they do it for a while because that's what they're supposed to do, and they get bored because ultimately if the Bible doesn't affect your life in any way, then it is kind of just an old dusty book filled with history that a lot of people don't tend to enjoy reading. And so I don't want any of those outcomes for us. And in fact, I want us to be able to approach the scriptures in a meaningful and fruitful way. And so when we read, and specifically for this series and this year, when we attempt this concept of meditation, we have to understand what the purpose of the Bible is. And to help us understand that, I actually have two things that the Bible is not, in order to help us narrow that down. So the first one is that the Bible is not written about me. Now, I'm not saying that there's no argument to be made that the Bible is written ultimately to me as a Christian, and that I'm supposed to take personally some of the things that are said. It's not what I'm saying at all. But when you just read the book, it's not written about me. I'm not the main character of the Bible, and neither are you. And that's important because, especially in our society today, media is built to make you the main character. That's the way that we predominantly consume things, even things that are about other things. So much of what's put into it are conveniences for me because it's my experience of somebody else's story. So the Bible is not written about me. And then the second one, and give me a chance to explain this one because this sounds bad up front, but the Bible is not morally black and white. And again, I will explain further what I mean by that when we get there. But this idea that if I approach the scriptures with the mentality that I am just going to be able to open it like a textbook, find the answer that I want, and move on with my life, I am going to end up confused, frustrated, etc. So let's talk about these two things. And I have, that's a little smaller than I was hoping it would be. The passage that I'm reading from, if you can't see that well enough, is 1 Kings 2, 1 through 7. And I'm going to use that for both of these points, actually. It feels like a pretty obscure passage. Most of the people reading this are not going to be super familiar with it, like in a specific sense. They might have read it before. They might have some idea of the context, but it's not seemingly a super important passage that we turn back to. Like I don't think I've ever referenced this in a sermon. I don't think I've ever heard anybody else reference it. So it doesn't feel super important, and I wanted to use a verse that was kind of like that, where you would read it and maybe come away with this idea that, well, why is this important? If the Bible's supposed to be special and truthful and important, why is this here? And so let's go ahead and let's read this, and let's kind of do some meditating. Let's break it down and talk about it. So starting in verse 1, when David's time to die was near, he told his son Solomon, I am going the way of all the earth, so be strong, show yourself to be a man, do what the Lord your God tells you, walk in his ways, keep all his laws and his word by what is written in the law of Moses. Then you will do well in all that you do and in every place you go. Then the Lord will keep his promise to me. He has said to me, your sons must be careful of their way to walk before me in truth with all their heart and soul. If they do, you will never be without a man on the throne of Israel. Now you know that what Zeruiah's son Joab did to me. You know what he did to the two captains of the army of Israel. He killed Abner, the son of Ner, and Amasa, the son of Jether, in the time of peace as if it were a time of war. He put the blood of war on his belt and on the shoes of his feet. So act with wisdom. Do not let his gray hair go down to the grave in peace, but show kindness to the sons of Barzillai, the Gileadite. Let them be among those who eat at your table, for they helped me when I ran from your brother Absalom. Now, I want to give some context to this passage. This is something that, just in terms of general Bible study, we want to try and do, is to understand a little bit more about the context of a passage. And specifically what I want to talk about is I want to talk about the context that Solomon is in as he is entering this kingship, because that's the context of this conversation that David is having. David's about to die, and so he's talking to Solomon about becoming king. So David's reign as king is a bloody one. If you go back and you look through David's life after he becomes king, after he is run in the wilderness for 40 years, he fights off Saul's forces. Like, even after he becomes the public king, there are still remnants of Saul's forces that are basically trying to dethrone him again. And so he has wars multiple times against different factions of people to fight those off. He also goes on multiple conquests outside of the Judean borders, and he fights many of the foreign nations that are surrounding the region. And then finally, I say finally as if this is the only thing, but I didn't want to list a bajillion wars that David fights. Finally, civil war due to his son Absalom. So David, even after fighting these different wars, has internal conflict that he fights because his son Absalom creates civil war. So that's the first thing, is that David's reign is a bloody one, which means that peace is tentative at best. The idea of peace is always kind of on the fringe because there are always more enemies, and Israel is seen as a threat at this time. The second thing is that Solomon's not supposed to be king. He's not the firstborn, but God chose him to be king. So you got to understand that even with God telling David, hey, Solomon's going to become king, not these other people, and with David announcing Solomon as king, if you actually continue reading on, first off, another one of his sons gets the throne first. They jump in front of Solomon and they announce that his older son is the king. And so Solomon is entering into the kingship, not as king, basically. He's only king of half of, or less than half of the nation at the time until he fights them off. But he's also kind of in bad standing with the rest of his family because it goes against the traditional model of the oldest son becoming king. And so they're upset with him. They don't like him, and so he starts fighting against them. And then the third thing is that David was not allowed to build the temple that he wanted to build for God, but God said that Solomon would build that temple. And so David, not in this passage, but in close by passages, David actually lays out what his plans for the temple are so that Solomon can build it. And I want you to just try and do the best you can to put yourself in Solomon's shoes for a second. You are entering into the kingship of this relatively vast nation. It's not like it's a tiny little town that you're a governor of. He's got armies and multiple cities under his control, and trade ports and routes and all the stuff that you have to deal with as like a normal leader. On top of the fact that basically every foreign nation surrounding them hates Israel in one way or another. There's civil war going on between his own brothers. And just in case that's not enough, Dad has these super high expectations of this really cool temple that I'm supposed to build that's going to take me like 40 years to build. So Solomon is entering into this kingship, and maybe at this point he's cool as a cucumber. I'm not if I'm entering this. Man, I am panicked because this is crazy. what Solomon is entering into. And I want that to kind of be the first portion of what we're doing, because when I step back and I look at the context of what's being talked about, I want to show how silly this thing that we do can become. So what we tend to do, I'm saying we to include myself and not to isolate. You might not do this, and if you don't, that's great. We is a general term because this happens a lot in church Bible reading, and you actually see it in sermonizing a lot, where we basically look at this passage and we say, hey, I can be strong and I can show myself to be a man. I can do what the Lord tells me, and I can walk in his ways. I can keep his laws that were written, and I can then have hope that I'll do well because I do those things. Notice what I just did. I just made myself the main character. I just made this passage written about me. And not only is there danger in the sense that maybe I'm misapplying some of the things that are there, maybe I'm attaching certain standards or rules that shouldn't be in place. I'm not necessarily saying that about this passage. That's just a general danger. But I think more importantly, what we are doing is we are de-emphasizing the rest of the passage. Because so often what's going to happen when we read this passage is you're going to look, and what I did is I bolded it, because this is what happens in our brain. When David's time to die was near, he told his son Solomon, I am going the way of all the earth. So here's what I'm supposed to do, because this is what David tells Solomon to do. This list of things. So this is what I'm focused on. I'm going to do all of these things, and everything's going to be great. And oh yeah, there's stuff with his brothers and like Joab and all of that sort of stuff. And I'm going to just keep reading really quick. And hopefully he gives like another command somewhere down the line that I can focus on that too. You know, we just completely skip over it. But what I just did is I gave you the concept or the context of the passage. And in the context of the passage, David's the main character. It's about his death. That's the whole point of the passage, is writing about this great king's death and about his last words that he has for his son Solomon, who is about to become king. It has nothing to do with me. Now, maybe eventually it will, because I can ascertain some truths from this, and I can see that there are some things that I can apply. But if I make this passage about me, then I centralize, and I'm going to show this, I centralize the passages that are meaningful to me, even if those are not the central verses of the passage. And I have this example, and I don't want this to be taken poorly, because this is a very favorite verse of a lot of people. But Philippians 4:13 is a great example of this. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength, through him who gives me strength, whatever translation you're reading from. And in this passage, if you take time to actually look at it, it's an amazing passage. It's a hope-filled passage. It's something that we should 100% look at and find as encouragement and instruction for us. I'm going to start there. Those are all true. However, because I make myself the main character, when I can do all things through him who gives me strength, what I mean by that is, what are the things that I want to accomplish? Oh, as long as I have Christ, I can accomplish those things. They're my goals. They're my hopes. That is not even close to what Paul is talking about in the passage. Literally, what he's talking about in the passage is that he is suffering a whole bunch of things, and he's like, but guys, don't worry, because I'm going to make it through because I got Christ on my side. So don't worry about me, worry about yourselves, do the things that I'm telling you to do, like having a humble spirit and all of this sort of stuff. Verse 13 is like a side thought. It's not the main thought at all of Paul's message there. But I make it the main thought, I make it about me, and I can, in doing so, miss really the thrust that Paul has for that message. And Why is this important? Why is it important? Because obviously, in a certain extent, I do want to make the scriptures about me. I'm reading so that I can affect my life. I'm reading so that I can adapt the way that I live. So it is going to be about me at a certain point. And I don't want to take that away. What I want to say is that when I make the scriptures about me, when I become the main character, what is going to happen is, like I showed with Philippians, like I showed with 2 Kings, I am going to find certain things in the scriptures that speak heavily to me, but the vast majority of scriptures will not speak to me. And so even though I can have these few experiences with verses that sound really nice, and you see this with church culture, we've got this collection of like 15 verses that just get repeated over and over and over and over and over again. Everybody's got them tattooed on their wrists and pinned up on their wall. Same 15 verses because they sound nice and they apply to me. But what about the rest of the 98% of the Bible? We don't focus on that very much because, well, it doesn't feel like it's about me. Because when I read it, it's not that exciting. It doesn't seem like it affects my life. It doesn't seem like, what do I care about Joab's death? What do I care about David telling Solomon to do something about that? That doesn't affect me at all. And yet it does. And here's why. Because 1 Kings, is it 1 Kings or 2 Kings? I don't even remember at this point. You can figure it out. Whichever Kings it is that I just quoted from recounts the history of the nation of people of Israel. It's very similar to me actually reading about the Founding Fathers, where I can look back and I can learn from their successes and also their failures. And then I also can gain context as to where I came from and where this nation came from so that I can get earmarks as to sort of the tendencies that we have here. The Bible is truth. And what I mean by that is that, in this case, the presentation of Kings is written to the Israelites as a remembrance of their forefathers, and not as a moral dictate of exactly how they should or shouldn't be, but a true recounting of what happened in their nation's history, and therefore examples to look at and to meditate over, and to ask questions about. And now I want to get to the second one, because we're gonna flesh out this King's passage. The second danger that we commonly face is when I approach the scriptures from a mentality that they are black and white. In this passage, I'm going to read it really quick and then I'm going to ask the question. Now you know what Zeruiah's son Joab did to me. You know what he did to the two captains of the armies of Israel. He killed Abner, the son of Ner, and Amasa, the son of Jether, in the time of peace, as if it were in the time of war. He put the blood of war on his belt and on the shoes of his feet. So act in wisdom. Do not let his gray hair go down to the grave in peace. Was David right? Now, you see, we read through these, and maybe we skip over them entirely. Maybe we just blaze through the passage because I'm focused on some other things, and I don't even think about this at all. But there is this tendency that we have, especially in American culture where justice is supposed to be black and white, yes and no, to look and to say, well, it's in the Bible, and it doesn't say that it's wrong, so it must be right. And again, I don't know that it's that structured in our minds. I don't think that we sit there and think, well, was David right? Yeah, it was in the Bible. It must be right. Rather, it's this subconscious assumption that I approach. So what is going on here? And this is where the meditation comes in. What is David asking Solomon to do? Is he asking him to kill Joab? Is he asking him to make sure that he pays for his crimes in one way or another, like going to prison or something like that? Is he looking and trying to say, make sure that he doesn't rise up and become somebody great because of his crimes? That's something for you to think about. I'm not going to answer these questions. What about this? Was David making a legal judgment? Was he looking and saying, well, this guy broke the law, and we need to make sure that he's punished. We need to make sure that he doesn't get away with breaking the law? Was David seeking revenge? Was David upset about the thing that the guy did, about the people that he loved and cared about? And he was asking Solomon to go and kill him because David was upset with what he did? How about this one? Is it okay to kill somebody because they killed somebody you love? What do you think about that? Again, I'm not going to answer these questions. But these are real questions from this passage. Is David right? Is it okay what David is asking Solomon to do? Because the Bible isn't trying to answer any of these questions. If it were, they would be a lot more clear. What the Bible is trying to do is it's trying to give me a true depiction of what happened and the outcome so that I can see whether or not I should follow the example. David saw justice in death, and he used it. If you read through his kingship, this happens a lot. A lot of people died in David's reign. And that's just a true statement. We get stories of this happening, and a lot of them are not answered in a moral way. A lot of them don't say, and God approved of these killings, or God disapproved of these killings. We just get the fact that it happened. But this led to a lot of killing during his reign and in his house. And the Bible has a lot to say, especially in the New Testament, about killing, about murder, about the difference between those two. It has a lot to say about the example that David sets. But just look at it practically. What happened in David's reign based on all the killing that he did? He created enemies with other nations. He set an example for his children that killing was the answer to political issues. He gave his son Absalom leeway and allowed him to do things that he shouldn't have done and created civil war. He now is sitting on his deathbed, and apparently, instead of being concerned with many other things that he could be, is concerned about the life of this dude that killed one of his friends. You know, David may be sitting here with revenge in his heart, with a grudge. He may be brooding over something that's wrong. He may not have needed to kill all the people that he killed in his reign, and maybe it would have gone better for him. These are all things that we are to meditate on. This is what so much the Old Testament is about, are these truths that take place and how they affect our lives. And I don't want to be crass, but I think it's a really good example. Did you know that the Old Testament doesn't ever directly condemn polygamy? It doesn't. Go look for it. It's not there. But what it does do is it gives you a whole bunch of examples of polygamy happening, and none of them are good. Go back and look through the early, like the forefathers, and look at their marriages and how screwed up their families are. Look at how many wives are frustrated because they're not loved by their husbands. Look at how many sins are perpetrated because of the family structure that are pursued in these Old Testament families. Just go and look. The example's not hard to find. They're all over the place. So the Bible doesn't need to directly condemn it if it's truly showing you what happens when this takes place. But it takes me meditating on it. The Bible's not sitting here trying, like the Old Testament, to give me a list of laws that I can live by. If that were the case, then I would have it in the New Testament. If that were the case, then there would be a verse out there that said, don't do polygamy. It would be there. But it doesn't need to, because the Bible is so much more than that. And Jesus talks about this in Matthew 5, where he even addresses these laws that the Israelites had, and he says basically, look, that law is great, and I want you to follow it, but it's just not doing enough. Because you can not murder and still hate. Because you cannot commit adultery and still lust. It's not good enough to just follow the law. We have to be seeking the will of God. And the Bible is this truth, this presentation that we have of the reality that we live in, that I'm supposed to consume and to meditate on. So what's the point? If we want the Scriptures to speak meaningfully to us, we have to let them. When I force the Scriptures to conform to my life and my images of morality, I prevent them from showing me what wealth of truth that they have to offer, from challenging me to think deeply and to search further, and being alive and exciting. You know, when I make the Scriptures conform to my biases, when I approach them like a menu where I just want to pick a couple of things out here and there, or when I approach them like a dusty old textbook and I just need to read so that I can get some facts, it's not going to be exciting. And it's not going to feel important to me. So I need to learn how to let the Scriptures speak. And that means not always being the main character. And that means letting things be said that are morally gray and asking the question, what is the truth about this? What else does the Bible have to say here? What examples do I have of this following through? Is this good or is this bad? And learning how to not just look for a list of laws that I can follow so that I can feel secure in my salvation, but to look for the Spirit of God and the heart of His will through the Scriptures, that I can align not just my do's and don'ts, but my actual desires in life after His. That I can look and I can say, well, yeah, it's great that I don't murder, but man, I really need to check my heart because I'm not forgiving like I should be. And that takes meditation. That takes self-reflection. That takes time to be able to sit with the Scriptures and to let them say what they have to say. And so that's it for this week. And we're going to keep talking more and more practically about how we can do it, some tips and tricks and some more mental processes to work through. But just for this week and kind of to continue to build on the goal, we want to this year find time and space to meditate. And when we go to meditate, I want us to keep one rule in mind. I don't assume what the Scriptures are telling me. I let them speak to me what they have to say. And I interpret and I adjust my life based on that instead of adjusting the Scriptures based on what I want them to say. I allow them to speak the truth that they have. So let them say what they have to say and ask why. Share these thoughts with others and questions with others, because this is really where biblical conversation and discussion comes from, is when I am sitting and meditating. I now all of a sudden have these thoughts and questions. That's what I share with my brothers and sisters, and they share their thoughts and questions, and now all of a sudden we are meditating together. We're sharing the Scriptures in our lives. And I like this last one because I think that this really speaks to the heart of what we're talking about. It's like David. Learn to love them for what they are. The truth of the matter is that if right now you look at the Bible and it's not in fondness, it's not in a desperate need to know what it is because you love the truths that you find in them, then you may need to change how you are approaching it. Because in the Bible, there is life. In the Bible, there is truth that we live by and love from our Father who's trying to speak to us through them. That is exciting. And that is worth all the time and effort that we have for them.